Welcome to Wichita Liberty TV with Bob Weeks.
Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news and commentary about Wichita and Kansas government and politics. We're broadcast on KGBT Channel 26 and its companion website, kgbt26.com. Some of you may know me for my blog, The Voice for Liberty, at wichitaliberty.org. The motto there is individual liberty, limited government, and free markets in Wichita and Kansas. So I mostly cover Wichita, Sedgwick County, and Kansas, although with some of the national events taking place, we'll look at those from time to time as needed. So I cover things that may not be covered by the Wichita Eagle or other television stations or radio. Or if we do cover the same news, I'm doing it from the perspective of economic freedom, limited government, and individual liberty, as these are the things that are important, and these are the things that are so often under attack by our governments, federal, state, and local. So please visit wichitaliberty.org. You can subscribe to the email newsletter, and if you want to contact me, you can find my email address and telephone number there, or it's pretty simple to remember, bob.weeks@gmail.com. Well, last week we saw Amanda BillyRock illustrate Chapter 5 of the book Economics in One Lesson, which was titled Taxes Discourage Production. Now, production, despite what you may have been told about our consumer spending-driven economy, production is what is important, because we can't consume until we first produce. And here's a story that economist Walter E. Williams tells that again illustrates how taxes discourage production. Williams says this story: suppose I want you to hire you to repair my computer. Having the work done is worth $200 to me, and performing the work is worth $200 to you. Now that transaction will occur because we have a meeting of the minds. But suppose Congress imposes a 30% income tax on you. That means if you repaired my computer, you would receive not $200, what it was worth you to do the job, but instead only $140 after the taxes are paid. And you might say, the heck with repairing my computer, spending time with your family is worth more than $140. So you might then offer that you do the job if I paid you $283. That way, your after-tax earnings would be $200, which is what doing the job is worth to you. But there's a problem. The repair job was worth $200 to me, not $283. So it's my turn to say the heck with it. This simple example demonstrates that one effect of taxes is that of destroying transactions and hence jobs. Well, fortunately, the city of Wichita, Sedgwick County, and our school districts don't have the power to levy income taxes. But our state, Kansas, does have an income tax. But fortunately, these taxes are being reduced. Local governments, however, do have property and sales taxes, and in particular, sales taxes drive a wedge between buyers and sellers, just like the income tax example that Walter Williams used. And through the spread of community improvement districts, the sales tax rate in parts of Wichita is rising. And just this week, the Wichita City Council set in motion a process that will likely result in higher taxes on those who rent hotel rooms in Wichita. And as I've talked about in the past, there are many special interest groups in Wichita that want a higher sales tax rate. So even though our state income tax is being reduced, we started from a high, that is, bad position. Last year, the Tax Foundation released a report that examined the tax cost on business in the states and in selected cities in each state. And the news for Kansas was worse than merely bad, as our state could not have performed much worse. Kansas ranked 47th among the states in tax costs for mature business firms and 48th for new firms. That's bad. And I wish that there were, in fact, President Obama's 57 states, so we'd have a few more states that we might do better than. And the city of Wichita was also mentioned in this report, and the city did not do much better than the state. But these higher taxes, though, are called benefits by government. That's right. When the city of Wichita considers whether to grant economic development incentives, it has an outside agency calculate a cost-benefit ratio. And if the benefits exceed the costs by a certain margin, the city deems it a good investment. But when considering cost-benefit ratios, we need to realize that the benefits in the calculation are in the form of increased tax revenue paid to the city, county, school district, and state. There is no consideration of actually rewarding the taxpayers that pay for and assume the risk of economic development incentives. And furthermore, these benefits are not like the profits that business firms earn by pleasing their customers who engage in voluntary trade. Remember, that's the happy that Amanda BillyRock illustrated for us. Instead, these benefits are in the form of taxes that government takes, not earns. And local governments also levy what are in effect taxes that drive a wedge between producers and consumers through regulation. Here's an example. Last year, the city of Wichita updated its regulations for taxicabs. These regulations create substantial barriers to entering the taxicab market. Some of the most restrictive regulations include these. Well, first of all, you can't just operate a cab. There has to be a taxicab company. And that taxicab company must have a central office staffed at least 40 hours per week, and it must have a dispatch system operating 24 hours per day, 7 days per week. It must have enough cabs to operate citywide service, which the city has determined is 10 cabs. And a taxicab company must have supervisor on duty at all times when cabs are operating. These requirements, in effect, eliminate the small-time entrepreneur and the solo operator from entering the taxicab market. Things like a dispatch system, central office, fleet of 10 taxicabs, and supervisors sound good. But all these things are costly, and they are not all necessary to get started in the business or perhaps even to thrive. And since some of the complaints we've had in Wichita are the lack of available cabs at the airport, we need more cabs, not fewer. But these taxicab regulations drive a wedge between those who would like to provide taxicab service and the customers who would like potentially cheaper and better service. And government calls this progress. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. Are you concerned that there is a good old boy network in Wichita, a group of insiders, cronies if you will, who feed off the taxpayers and who are enabled by Wichita elected officials and bureaucrats? And are you concerned that Wichita officials are looking out for their interests and not for yours? Well, here's a video I made that explains a recent episode in our city's history. Do you wonder whether our elected officials and bureaucrats are looking out for your interests or only for the interests and welfare of a small group of City Hall insiders? Well, based on the process used to select a developer for the West Bank apartments in Wichita, Wichitans need to be concerned. Here's what happened. The city uses an evaluation committee to provide advice to the city council. The policy the city is supposed to use includes, as you can see in the city document, past project experience with the City of Wichita and also references. Here's a City of Wichita document that tells us that references were provided. So do you wonder if the evaluation committee contacted these references and what did they learn? Let's consider the references listed by one team, the River Vista team. This is the team that the city selected. Here's the references supplied by George Lamb, one of the River Vista development partners. He listed Bob Layton, who is the Wichita city manager. Well, two things. First, do you think it is appropriate for the city manager to be used as a reference, given that anyone who reads this document would take it as an endorsement? Well, the answer is no. It's not appropriate. And a second question, do you think it's appropriate for the city manager to endorse one of the applicants like this? Well, we don't know if the presence of the city manager's name implies an endorsement because George Lamb did not ask the city manager if he could be used as a reference. We know this because we asked. Further, whoever evaluated these development teams did not call the city manager to inquire about George Lamb. We asked about this too. But making inquiries of references, isn't that what a vetting team should do? Oh, and look who else George Lamb listed as references. Dave Unruh, Sedgwick County Commissioner. We asked him, and Lamb did not request his permission to list him as a reference, and the evaluation committee did not contact Unruh.
There's Wichita City Council member Jeff Longwell, same for him. And there's Wichita City Council member and Vice Mayor Pete Meitzner, same for him. No permission and no contact by the evaluation committee. Okay, here's Dave Wells, another member of the River Vista Development Team. He listed Wichita Mayor Carl Brewer, District Attorney Mark Bennett, and Sheriff Jeff Easter. And Jeff Longwell and Dave Unruh make their second appearance in an apparent endorsement of this development team. We asked, and Easter did give permission to be listed as a reference, but none of the others did, and none were contacted by the evaluation committee. River Vista Development Team member Bill Warren dropped some big names as references. There's Kansas Governor Sam Brownback. Was he contacted for his permission to be used this way? We asked his office, and the answer was no. There's our United States Congressman from Wichita, Mike Pompeo. We asked his office, and he did not give permission for his name to be used. And when we asked if any of these officials had been contacted by the evaluation committee, the answer was always no. If the evaluation committee had contacted these officials, here's what they might have learned. About Dave Wells, the city manager might have told of cost overruns on city projects. Considering Dave Wells and Dave Burke as a team, these two were part of the original Water Walk team. Now that's a project in downtown Wichita that's received over $40 million in public subsidy, and it's struggling to say the least. A reference check might have tipped off the evaluation committee about this. Or consider Dave Burke alone. A few years ago, the Wichita Eagle reported, downtown Wichita's leading developer, David Burke, represented himself as an agent of the city, without the city's knowledge or consent, to cut his taxes on publicly owned property he leases in the Old Town Cinema Plaza, according to court records and the city attorney. City officials told the Eagle that he did not have authorization to file an appeal on the city-owned parking and retail space he leases. A reference check could have uncovered this misdeed. And for Bill Warren, several of the references could have told about the bailout the city issued to his Old Town Theater. That's a bailout needed for a project built in conjunction with the city of Wichita. Wasn't one of the evaluation criteria past project experience of the city of Wichita? A reference check could have let the evaluation committee learn about all these episodes of unfavorable experience with these applicants. But really, all this information is known by the public. It's in the newspaper. In light of this, government officials not asked for permission to be listed as references, an evaluation committee that never contacted these references, and the information that these references could have provided. Do you think the evaluation committee fulfilled its duty to perform due diligence on behalf of the people of Wichita? And are you satisfied with the job Wichita City Hall did for you?
So we have a process, the evaluation committee, that the city tells us is there to safeguard the city's interests. But it appears that this process, as far as this episode illustrates, is a sham. Here's a question. Why did not the evaluation committee contact even one of these officials that were listed as references? And here's an observation. These applicants likely knew that the evaluation committee would not contact these references, which makes us wonder, what is the point of even having an evaluation committee and an evaluation process? And further, do you think it's appropriate for the city to do business with someone who thinks it's acceptable to list the city manager as a reference without first asking if that was permissible and knowing that the manager would not be contacted? Now, if you're a cynical person, you might conclude that the process was indeed a sham. That despite the city's assurances that there is an evaluation committee looking out for our interests, it's the same network of insiders and croners that get what they want. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. Well, turning our attention back to Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt, Let's have Amanda BillyRock illustrate Chapter 6, which is titled Credit Diverts Production.
Economics in One Lesson, written by Henry Hazlitt, retold by Amanda BillyRock. Chapter 6. All of the organizations listed here have something in common. And all of the people listed here have something in common. Do you know what it is? The first group were people who were recipients of something, and the second group are people who were fleeced to provide that something. If you don't know the word fleeced, look it up. It's a fantastic word. And the something I'm talking about is government grants and loans, known more accurately as bailouts. But if these organizations were going bankrupt and needed money, why didn't they just go to a bank and borrow some? When the rest of us need money, we go to a private lending institution and take out a loan. So why did these organizations not do the same? Why did they instead get money from government? Here's how it works. Say you have a friend who has terrible credit, who has been known to default on several loans, and he asks you for money. And you of course say, "No way, Jose." But if your friend is besties with government, he can borrow your tax money from them. The government will give him a grant or a loan because they're not gambling with their own money, they're gambling with your money. They don't really care if it gets paid back or not. And you may say, but when people pay back their government loans, they pay them back with interest. So really, the taxpayers are making money. When was the last time you got an interest check in the mail from a paid back loan? You didn't. If you didn't go bankrupt in 2008, you won. And the corporate lobbyists from Wall Street, who did go bankrupt, lost. But through the tax system, you were made to lose, so they could win. Angry yet? You should be. Stay tuned for Chapter 7.
One of the things government tells us is that in these cases, the government is not lending the money to the business. Someone else, likely the bank, is the actual lender. Instead, what the government does is to guarantee the loan, meaning that if the borrower is not able to repay, the government does. And this was the case with Solyndra, the solar energy company that failed recently. It received loans guaranteed by the federal government, which is to say that taxpayers took the risk of these loans. And when Solyndra failed, taxpayers were liable for $700 million in loan guarantees. These loan guarantees represent real risk to taxpayers, even though government officials downplay that risk. They tell us it's just a loan guarantee after all. What could go wrong? But we know that not all business firms succeed. If that were not so, there would be no need for entrepreneurs to take the risk of business startups. But there is risk in the world. And Henry Hazlitt tells us there is a decisive difference between the loans supplied by private lenders and the loans supplied by a government agency. Private lenders risk their own funds or the funds of others that they are responsible and accountable for. And when people risk their own funds, they are usually careful in their investigations to determine the adequacy of the assets pledged and the business acumen and honesty of the borrower. But that's not the case with government. The whole argument for government entering the lending business, in fact, is that it will make loans to people who could not get them from private lenders. This is only another way of saying that the government lenders will take risks with other people's money, the taxpayers that is, that private lenders will not take with their own money. So the government loans and guarantees have the effect of diverting credit from one person to another. Hazlitt uses the example of Farmer A and Farmer B. Now, Farmer A has credit, which is different from a loan. Farmer A has credit because he's shown to be successful and trustworthy, and perhaps because he has assets that he can pledge as collateral. But Farmer B has no credit. He has no track record, no assets to use as collateral. So who will the government lend to? Well, Farmer B, of course, as he can't get a loan anywhere else. There's no need for Farmer A to get a government loan, as he is creditworthy. He has credit. But the effect of the government loan to Farmer B is that capital, that is, farmland, tractors, and whatever else is needed to farm, has been diverted from the productive Farmer A to the unproductive Farmer B. The good and efficient producers are squeezed out in favor of the inefficient producers. Government, that is to say we taxpayers, are making unwise investments. This happens locally in Wichita all the time. Many of the economic development incentives that the city offers require that there be a gap. The city performs what it calls a gap analysis to determine if the proposed project requires financing that the private sector won't provide. And if such a gap is found, the city may step in with various programs to close the gap. But here's a problem. When the city is willing to fill in financial gaps, you can be sure that gaps will be created. Here's an example. A few years ago, a developer wanted economic development incentives to build a grocery store. He was able to convince Wichita City staff that there was indeed a gap, according to city documents, of about $950,000 on a total project cost of $2 million. In other words, the purported gap was nearly half the total project cost. And the city awarded incentives based on this analysis. But the Sedgwick County Commission also had a say in this matter, and it decided not to participate in the subsidies. So the subsidies went away. And then here's what happened. A different developer stepped in. And in the hands of this different developer, the gap evaporated and the project was able to stand on its own without public assistance. The grocery store was built, and it was larger than the original plan. That's a plan that was said to be impossible without taxpayer assistance. Like I said, when the city or any other governmental body is willing to fill in financing gaps, you can be sure that gaps will be created. And even to the extent that these gaps are legitimate, and that's a big if, when the city, county, or state step in to fill the gap, they do so by diverting resources from productive uses to uses that are less productive. Remember, the gap is there because the private sector, that is, people risking their own money, would not fill the gap. So it's left to you and I, the taxpayers, to do that. And we're told there is little risk. But in the video I showed earlier, the city had to make a no-interest and low-interest loan to bail out an Old Town movie theater because its failure put taxpayers at risk of paying for the earlier investment the city made in the theater. That earlier investment, of course, was said to be safe and have little risk. But it wasn't. And similar situations like this have happened elsewhere in the city. Let's hope that our elected and bureaucratic officials will take a moment to read Henry Hazlitt's book, Economics in One Lesson. Or maybe they'll watch this show or Amanda BillyRock's videos. We have to hope for something. Well, thanks for watching this episode of Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks.